Welcome, acolytes. Here, the term woke right continues to be nonsense. I just don't know what he actually describes as woke right, but I would say that there exists such a thing, but it's not really to a high degree what you would say. It's more of a few people pretending to be right that don't know what this is than actually people that are on the right. So let's just see it. Let's just hear what he has to say about
This
it.
is just going to be a quick rant re-exploring the term woke right. This idea that the term wokeness can apply to more right-wing ideologies or just kind of random ideologies in general. Because there's a recent video out from the Dark Horse podcast where James Lindsay, the guy who's mostly pushing this term woke right, kind of went into things into a bit more detail. And after watching it, the whole thing really just revealed quite
An old boomer, old man, tries to push the old right, woke right thing. Nah, probably won't work. He doesn't understand shit.
conclusively to me why the term woke right really shouldn't be used, at least not by any functioning, reasonable person who cares about consistency. And while I did watch a whole thing, there is a simple short that they put out that kind of summarizes it. And so to keep this in line with being a quick rant, I'll just be responding to the short, and just one simple clip from the full version that really needs to be pointed out as well. So let's get things started.
Well, I've heard you describe woke right many times, and I never get it.
So first off, this confusion of what exactly the term woke right means is absolutely understandable, because the people pushing this term regularly contradict themselves on it. But overall, it seems that
I'm gonna be honest. This is new for me that people are actually pushing this, because in my opinion, as I said, the woke right are just people who pretend to be right to actually go in the new zeitgeist, or the zeitgeist that is exploding right now. So yeah, it's basically just pretenders.
they're taking the symptoms of wokeness rather than the ideology of wokeness and seeing them in a few right-leaning ideologies. So for example, what James and company seem to be trying to do is attach the term wokeness to various strategies of power dynamics that are often considered overzealous. Things like cancel culture, dogmatism, collectivism, conformity, and just general authoritarianism, TLDR, things that are often seen as underhanded tactics to gain power and stay in power. So let's move to the
I mean, yeah, those are things that everybody that's in power uses, or a lot of those things. Acolytes, I hope you don't believe that if the zeitgeist changes, that there won't be people that won't use those tactics just because they are on the other side. No. There will be enough of those people that will actually use the exact same tactics as the people that are in power right now. Our job is it to actually just tell them that they suck and put them into asylums. That's what we have to do.
next clip.
Never. And I will say, I am not against the idea that woke is a concept that can be broken away from the equity movement and properly applied elsewhere.
The problem with this is I don't really see a good reason to attach the term wokeness to simple strategies and symptoms, because we already have words for those strategies and symptoms. So why disconnect it from the
This is correct. We already have words for it. And it, as he says, it doesn't make any sense to attach new things to it. This is actually a tactic that a lot of religions use, or even not just religions. I mean, it's basically something where the human brain just functions that way. The more often you're exposed to something, the more easier, the better you remember it, and the more fondly you treat it, or as something that's already here, as something that you know. And if you attach this word or this thing to other things, it becomes normalized. It becomes something you know, and it becomes something you can accept quicker and easier. So, yeah. And again, that's a tactic.
equity movement, as he puts it. I have yet to see a single person pushing the term woke right to give any good reason for why we need to do that. I mean, language at the end of the day is just a social construct. It's just about conveying various information to other people. And so you need agreement on what the language means in order for the language to mean anything. And so when you suddenly try to take away that agreement, well, that's kind of cringe. It goes against the purpose of what language is supposed to be for. And when you try to take a word and just kind of attach it to a whole bunch of things you don't like, a whole bunch of strategies and symptoms and whatnot that are viewed as generally quote-unquote bad, well, the problem is you then risk the term becoming kind of a snarl word. It ends up losing meaning other than just a word that has negative connotations.
But this will happen automatically over time. This is just a repeating cycle. It always happens.
Like, for example, the word incel. Originally, the word incel just generally referred to the people who are involuntarily just, not able to get laid. And of course, the internet kind of made fun of this community quite a lot, actually. And the result of this is that eventually incel started just kind of be used as a general insult by people who have no idea what an incel actually means. And so nowadays, you'll see really stupid things like people calling a married man an incel, which of course is just completely disconnected from the original definition of the word. A married man is very much...
But that's how the word changed. It, as sad as it is, I would also prefer it to keep the meaning it did because, well, it's the effing meaning of the word. But we don't live in that world.
The opposite of an incel. But it doesn't matter because people abuse the term so much that it's kind of lost original meaning. And that I see is the main issue with people pushing the term woke right. They're attaching it to these kind of negative strategies of power that they don't like, rather than anything really specific. And that's just going to end up turning the word woke into a snarl word, the problems of which really reveal themselves in the next clip.
It might turn out that you're at some point extremely prescient, and this is embarrassing for us.
I'm actually 10 years behind the curve, in my opinion. Woke epistemology means a preference for outside knowledges. There is a truth regime that excludes everything that would threaten its power base. And so anything outside of that truth regime is more likely to be valid and true because it challenges the existing power structure. That's woke. That's literally woke.
Alright, so now we can really get into the meat of things. An epistemology that favors outside knowledges. This is by far the most incoherent definition of wokeness I've ever seen. Let me just give my own definition of it and understanding to explain why. I've defined woke before as an aggressive push for diversity, equity, inclusion, usually based on the belief that outcomes which lack these things are indicative of discrimination and/or unfair social treatment. But a very simple way to...
Also racist. I would add racist. I would say the exact same thing, but I would add the word racist behind this mumbo jumbo of words.
Understand wokeness is where it comes from. In fact, if you're having trouble explaining what wokeness is to a clueless normie, the easiest way to break it down into just 2 words is to call it collectivist envy. And so, depending on which collective you are deemed to be in, this then manifests through woke belief as either collective guilt or collective victimhood, or in some interesting cases both when intersectionality comes into play. This offers a simple way to explain why certain things are woke and why certain things are not, with an easy example being something like college admissions with equity in mind, or how a lot of institutions of higher learning decided to have lower standards for certain minority groups in order to elevate that group. And so that's really what wokeness is. Those who are considered to be collectively victimized based on their unequal outcomes are viewed as having some kind of passive negative debuff that just automatically makes life harder for them based on being a member of that collective group. Whereas on the flip side, the collective groups seen as the oppressors must be collectively de-elevated and given higher standards for admissions into higher learning because they have privilege, at which point the same fallacy is seen. They think that this privilege is some kind of passive bonus that is always available to you no matter what. And of course from this we can also see the basic problem, which is that their justification for elevating people based on their collective group status or demonizing people or belittling them based on their collective group status, well, it doesn't actually make logical sense.
Exactly, it doesn't. And I said it once and I will say it again, it's just freaking racist because you take the thing, you just say, yeah, it's that because of the skin color or the heritage of the people you're talking about. That's bollocks. Don't do it.
It's a very blatant statistical reasoning error, because belonging to certain groups is not a passive bonus. For instance, being white doesn't give you a +2 to easiness of every single thing that you do in life. And hilariously enough, all of these institutions of higher learning adopting woke ideology provide a simple example of that. Because if you're a member of an oppressor group and you're trying to get into one of these institutions that has this kind of rating system based on equity, well then it's actually harder for you, and therefore the wokes hilariously have contradicted themselves. If woketoids actually had self-awareness, they would look at what they're doing from the outside in. If the woketoids were to look at things from a level of higher consciousness, then they would realize that their own actions actually disprove their own ideology. So there you go. There's kind of a TLDR, somewhat nuanced, oversimplified explanation of what woke ideology is and why it's bad. Which then brings us back to this definition of the woke right. Based on this definition that wokeness is an epistemology that favors outside knowledges because it views the truth regime as inherently corrupt, and thus outside knowledge is more likely to be true. This is just so near meaningless, I can't even. I mean, just the logical conclusions of what he's saying mean it just has no connection to any ideology whatsoever. For instance, if the truth regime is ideology A, and that which goes against it and questions what it says is ideology B, and then 20 years later there's a power dynamic flip by just some kind of happening or whatever, that, results in ideology B now being the truth regime that is dominant within the centralized status system, well, does that mean that the people who adhere to ideology A, purely because they question the authority of ideology B, does that simply make them woke now? Because they now favor ideology A because it's no longer in power? I mean, there's some pedantic level of truth behind that. Favoring an ideology based on that kind of thing is pretty superficial and stupid. But of course, that's not really the problem here. The issue is that
the truth is that a lot of people that aren't of the thinking sort will fall for that, and this is exactly the kind of thing you need to actually persuade them to the other side. Yes, I am not joking about this. There are enough people that will just go somewhere or follow something, not because they think that it's a good plan, not because they think that over the long term this will actually succeed. None of those things where you say, yeah, I want a better future for me and my family and everyone. No. It sounds cool. Okay. It sounds like the thing that's bad. Why is it this way? I don't like it. Yeah, that's how this works. And I am sorry, but a lot of people just fall for that. It is what it is. It's an effective tactic.
This definition of wokeness just completely goes against everything that everybody has been talking about when it comes to what woke means. And instead going with this definition that is really just barely a single step away from saying wokeness is one thing I do not like. And that is just a really big mistake, because it inadvertently...
By the way, I also agree with that. I think it's a mistake. I think it's not a good way of seeing things, but that's just how it is.
Certainly helps out the far left. For instance, if you go to places with high midwit populations, like any trash lib subreddit, for example, when they talk about the word woke, they of course like to claim that it's a snarl word, that it's just a word that all righties use to describe things they don't like, or they try to describe wokeness as wokeness is when there's black people, which isn't true at all. It's a complete straw man of what we're saying. But by muddying the definition of wokeness here, like what James Lindsay is doing, is actually giving credence to that kind of straw man and that kind of belittling of the term woke. It's just going to result in the language being more and more confused due to less agreement about what the words mean. And lastly, I'd like to comment on something from the full video, because roughly 50 minutes into it, he went on to say this.
Militaristic form that you would have seen in the 20th century, but in the postmodern context, if we take Jordan Peterson's woke is postmodern neo-Marxism, and we say there's this postmodern neo-fascism, at least an element within the alt-right, why not call that woke right if that's the only thing different?
So yeah, this is kind of a problem I often see with more centrist liberal types, or people who prefer the world of neoliberalism as it is, and take the stance of being anti-woke simply because they view wokeness as a leftist attack on their way of life, which, kind of explains why they don't really understand it. And of course, that misunderstanding often bleeds into how they understand more far-right ideologies. Now, I'm not a wingnut, I'm a libertarian, but I at least understand other right-wing ideologies. And the thing is, none of them really believe in any level of postmodernism, and in fact they're very much against the theory. I mean, there is of course a collectivist right, but they're collectivist for very different reasons. For instance, they don't really base their ideology on collectivist envy, but rather their ideology is more based on collectivist disdain. They view certain groups as intellectually and morally inferior, and thus
That's a way of thinking I never actually thought about. Collectivist disdain. That's okay. New information or a new field of view for something like that. At least some new words I can use and throw people at. Collective disdain.
they argue that those groups must be separated from any kind of modern advanced society. Otherwise, they claim that they will destroy that society. So there is some element of collective guilt to it, and so in some ways they do commit the same fallacies as the cult of woke does.
Yes.
But it's a very radically different ideology. The methodology by which the far collective right uses collectivism is based more on a superior and inferior dichotomy rather than an oppressors and victims dichotomy. That's probably the best and simplest way to understand the difference. And from what I've seen, the people pushing the term woke right don't really fully understand this. And so they're kind of choosing a weird hill to die on, which is unfortunate because James Lindsay has done really good work in the past, which, ironically enough, based on his own definition of wokeness, his definition of woke would actually apply to him based on his work in the grievance studies affair, since he
By the way, everybody does a mistake or has a brain fart or thinks about something. Maybe not entirely. Maybe he is a genius and we just don't understand his freaking 5D chest thinking. But, you know, just because you did something good in the past doesn't mean you will do something good in the future. Although, past behavior is an indicator for future behavior, so...
question the status quo of academia. It's just really, really silly. And so I think the best thing for Lindsay is to just kind of stop using this term, stop pushing it, go back to doing the actual good work he used to do, rather than counter-signaling rightoids, which is basically what this whole woke right thing is really about. It just comes across to me as a very pointless attempt to redefine a word that we already have a very solid understanding of, simply as a way for centrist neolibs to virtue signal about how they're different from the rightoids. Very silly, very pointless. And that's all I have to really say on the matter. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, feel free to like, share, subscribe, comment, and all that
good stuff. I mean, he's correct. As I said, I agree with his definition. For the most part. I mean, it wasn't mine, but hey, things change. Sometimes you just have to think about it and just change the thing you thought about or talk about it differently. And it is what it is. But Acolytes as it is. Good night. Yeah, I know it's a bit quick, but also it is what it is. What the F? The Dogs of War. Irrelevant. Have a nice day. Show him some love. And good night.